is what you'll be saying in your very own original Applique Athleticwear. I'm going to show you how to make this on the Little Rebel. I have my pieces. First thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to trace your pattern. So you can kind of see I've already traced this one here. I'm going to show you how to do it with numbers and letters because this is the way that I want it to show up when I cut it out. So I'm going to flip this over. If I do it this way, when I cut it out, my numbers are going to be backwards because they're directional. So since I am going to be tracing on the back, I want to flip my letters, and you just want to use pencil. You don't want to use pen. And the reason you don't want to use pen is you are going to be doing some ironing, and pen will transfer and it will just kind of bleed and cause problems. So we're just going to trace. And you can use cardstock if you want something that's a little stiffer. Kind of depending on how and what you have available to you is what's going to help determine what you want to use. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to use these serrated scissors. They're micro serrated and they're going to help reduce some of the fraying that happens. It's not going to fix it completely, but it's going to reduce that. And so all we need to do is cut out our various shapes. Right, and so now you can see that my 3 will be the correct direction when I put it on my fabric. Right, so I'm just going to continue to cut out our designs. So as you can see, I have my pieces ready to go. Some of them are still on the backing fabric, so you should be able to, if you ironed it well, peel that off. And you'll have your sticky side here. It is sticky to the touch, but not super sticky. When we want it to be a little bit more firm, we can iron it with a dry iron. Now, some of these pieces are small and they might be a little bit harder to get the pieces off. So a little trick would be taking a needle and just scoring the paper. And then that will give you a place where you can get underneath with the needle. So you can get a little bit of leverage and then peel those off. I recommend that you try on the jersey so you can decide where you want to start the placement of your design. Everyone's shaped a little bit different. I'm short torsoed, so placement, if I do it too low, it's going to look funny on me. So I just took a cloth tape like this and I measured. In this case, I have, this white part here, but you could do it from the top to decide where I think it should be a good place. Then I moved it over to the ironing board. All right, so as you can see, I have my jersey that I'm using put onto the ironing board where it separates the front and the back. So I'm going to mark, in this case, the 3.5 line. I'm going to do that on both sides so that I've got a good portion for that. And I just want to make sure it's straight. So a couple of different rulers will help you with that. I have one here. I'm just going to make kind of my X mark. And I'm doing this with a white chalk pencil because my background is dark on the jersey. So now that I know where I want it to start, I'm going to start putting my design on here. I like pointed tweezers to help me place the images where I want them. And I want to try to get them as even as possible in the shapes that I want, about the same height. And I can just press that down for now with my fingers. And if I'm pretty happy with it, I'm afraid it's going to move, then I can use a dry iron. But I'm going to hold off on the dry iron as I continue. All right, so I want it to kind of curve. And if I want to make sure I'm staying kind of in line here, I can use my ruler. I'm pretty happy with that placement. Can also do this way as well. So that looks a little bit crooked to me, so I'm just going to adjust it. All right, so now that I have my letters on here, I can place my image. Just kind of decide where I want it. Again, I want it to be centered. So if I want to be sure that I'm centered, I can take this line down a little bit. I'm pretty happy with that placement. And I'm just going to continue to do this until I get my design put on here.
I'm going to dry iron it, and I recommend that you try it on again. See if everything's sitting where you want it to be, and if not, come back to the iron. It will be a little tougher to take off, but you can still take off the pieces and move them, dry iron again, and try until you're done. Once you've decided it's good, that's when you're going to do the steam.
So I'm going to use a dry iron, and the dry iron is going to help to adhere the letters and my design, my applique, a little bit better. It's not permanent yet because I haven't added steam. And once I steam it, it is going to stay permanently.
Now that we've finalized where our design is going to be, I'm ready to add the stabilizer and pin that down. So to make it really easy for me, I'm going to take this cutting mat and I'm going to slide it between the layers of fabric, and that's going to give me a good place to pin. So that's just a little trick that I like to do because, you know, with it being clothing and being two different parts, I need to be able to separate those parts and have a good place.
Now I'm going to cut a piece of stabilizer so it's a little bit bigger than my design. I want it to be about an inch. This is probably just a little bit shorter than that, but I do want it to be bigger than my design. It does not have to be pretty because you're going to remove it anyway. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this stabilizer and I'm going to put it in between that cutting board, and I can just do this by feel. I'm going to make sure that I'm getting it long enough on both sides. And now I want to pin it in place. Now I'm using some thin pins because this material here is a blend and it's stretchy, and I don't want to put and leave large holes in there. And so I want to kind of find the edges of that stabilizer and pin around it to keep it in place.
All right, I'm all pinned. I'm ready to now go to my little rebel and start sewing. It's now time to stitch down our main design and add some fun to it. I'm going to do that with our regular hopping foot for this one and do some free motion quilting. But if you're more comfortable and your design has a lot of square edges, you could just use the walking foot. That's one of the great things about the Little Rebel. You have a lot of choices. All right, I'm going to drop my foot. I'm going to bring up my bobbin. And with the Little Rebel, I find it helpful if I loosen that foot so I can get that bobbin up real easy, since it does add tension. And get right back to where I want it to be and drop again. And I'm just gonna go slowly around. Remember that I am doing this on manual mode and using my foot pedal since I'm doing applique, so I have more control. And I'm just gonna go as close as I can around the entire design. Coming back up the side. All right, so now this is where I'm going to add some fun to it with a little bit of free motion quilting so I can add some texture. And I'm sticking around in the green. I think it's a good idea to match the colors as close as you can, but still add some fun to it. So since this is supposed to be a spool of thread, I'm just kind of creating the loose thread parts that you might see on a spool. Nothing fancy here, just having a little fun with it. And kind of straight along this top part of the spool. Come back around. I've changed thread colors because I'm now going to do the numbers that I have on here. Remember that every time you change your thread, be sure to check your tension in your bobbin and on your machine, because each thread's just a little bit different, especially colored thread. So do the same thing we did before, pull up that bobbin. Get those tails out of the way. And let's stitch around these curves. Gonna do this a couple of times because I like the way it looks when it pops up and I get sort of that shadowing. All right, and if I want to go and add a little bit more detail to it, I'm going to fasten off and I'm going to move to the next number. All right, so we're going to fasten off now that we finished this, and we're going to finish our design with a little bit of yellow for that center part. All right, I've changed threads again. Just going to finish up my free motion design here. Like I mentioned before when doing the lettering, I am using an embroidery thread, which is polyester. And so if you've never really used anything but cotton thread, it is a little bit different to work with. It does tend to twist a little bit more. So you want to be real patient with it, get comfortable, practice before you go right onto your thing. But I like the shine of it, and with what we're doing here, treating this like an embroidery project, it just really adds some flair. I'm going to show you a little trick too when I don't want to change things out. I'm just going to bring up my bring up my needle, go to the next section that I want to quilt, and then I can just cut that extra part off that I don't want there, and that saves me from having to start and stop over. It's very much like an embroidery machine would do if you've ever watched an embroidery machine work. I just want some fun there. And I'll do the same thing as I go across to the front part here. Oh, we're so close to done. It's so going to be so cute. Right. A couple locking stitches. All right, let's finish her up. Because we're not on a frame, we're not really doing a quilt, I don't have to bring my bobbin up, I can just trim it from underneath. That's kind of the fun thing when you're working with something like this, because you can easily move it out of your way. All right, so now we're going to turn her inside out. Because now that our design is on there, we are going to trim off the excess stabilizer that we have on here and any excess threads that we have left from when we did our applique and our designs. Whether you're using a tearaway, this is a cutaway, or if you're using a dissolvable, the recommendation is you still trim as close as possible to the pieces here and then do the wash away part. That way it doesn't take as long to get that off. And with the wash away, it's a little sticky. It can leave a residue on there until you rinse it completely. So if you are using a wash away, you might want to throw the whole thing in your washing machine for a full-on rinse and wash. You could also leave the stabilizer if you want a better, or just like a more firm look to it, but I want it to be more like embroidery, so I'm going to cut as closely as possible. Just be careful. You don't want to catch your actual fabric. Nothing's worse, but that's why if you can kind of see, I like to pull it up a little bit once I get some areas loose, and then I can trim. I can see where my fabric is and really get rid of that excess. So I'm just going to finish this up and we'll be done. All right, now that I've cut away all of my stabilizer, we said rinse it if you're using the wash away. So we'll just turn it back right side out and it's done. We're ready to wear for our favorite events. You're gonna love making this. Everybody's gonna want one, but there's some different things you can do. If you're not really into this design, there's lots of clip art that you can use to trace things on, make it your own, make your own colors, find your own fonts. But the technique is just super fun to do, and I can't wait to make more.